If you work in e-commerce, you most probably know what a checkout funnel is. You track the different steps of the funnel from begin checkout to shipping method, payment method, and purchase. Then you calculate the bounce rate for each step and call it a day. Well, these metrics aren't wrong per se, but the way that most analysts read it, that is where the problem starts. If you run an e-commerce and the number of sessions with a completed purchase is positive and growing, well, that doesn't mean that your checkout is healthy. A single broken step of your checkout funnel can silently wipe out a huge number of potential orders. And the reality is that most e-commerce teams don't even recognize it until the revenues start to miss the targets. Hi, my name is Paolo, and in this video I will show you exactly how you can use completion rate and bounce rate in your funnel analysis. And we will also look at a real-life example of a funnel checkout, as well as a daily trend graph that will help you identify where the friction actually is. And by the end of this video, you will have learned how to turn a vague conversion problem in your checkout funnel into an actionable insight and a specific issue that your team can fix and act on. But before we jump into the core of the video, I want to say a few words about the e-commerce funnel. The way I see it, the e-commerce funnel is split into two sections, the upper funnel and the lower funnel. And each of them deserves its own treatment from an analytical standpoint because, well, they respond to completely different logics. The section of the funnel that I call the upper funnel, from session start to begin checkout, is quite messy. User can move around. They can go from PDP to PLP and then back to the home page. Users can move around quite easily with a high degree of freedom. Each user has its own single user journey. The funnel in general is open and each user journey is non-linear. And on top of that, the upper funnel of every e-commerce is quite influenced by the marketing strategy and the channel mix, which makes quite hard the upper funnel to be read as a hard and forced sequence of steps. But let's get to the core of this video, the checkout funnel or lower funnel. This is where things completely change. The lower funnel is a closed funnel, meaning that when a user hits the button begin checkout, the doors lock. Users have much less degree of freedom to move around easily or skipping steps. You cannot reach payment before going into shipping, and you cannot purchase without actually paying. In short, it's a forced path, and that is why it's also much easier to diagnose if compared to the upper funnel. The sequence is clear and easy. Begin checkout, add the shipping method, add payment method, and then complete purchase. Some checkouts also have a login page between them, and all of them allow you to come back one step to, for example, update your shipping information. This is fine, but it also doesn't change the fact that the checkout funnel is a closed funnel. Each step is quite locked, and for example, you cannot jump right in the middle or at the end of it. You have to go through a series of steps. And that is exactly why KPIs like bounce rate or completion rate are much more powerful in this kind of analysis than anywhere else. But if you try to apply these KPIs like bounce rate or completion rate to your upper funnel without looking at your marketing mix, well, there is the high risk of misunderstanding everything that you see. If you want to know more about the e-commerce funnel and how it differentiates from the user's journey, make sure to check out this video where we dig into the e-commerce funnel and you will understand why it's super important to look at your marketing mix to interpret it correctly. But let's get to the core of the video. Bounce rate or completion rate. Which of these KPIs should I actually use? To be honest, to track the checkout funnel, both of them are quite valid. The difference between them is mainly based on the scope of your analysis and who your stakeholders are. Bounce rate tells you what percentage of people dropped off at a certain step, while completion rate represents the number of people who actually made it to the next one. It's quite simple, they are inverses of each other. So that means that a 73% of completion rate represents a 27% of bounce rate. But why does this differentiation matters? The first reason is that completion rate is much more aligned with the strategy of your e-commerce business. Why do I say that? Because when completion goes up, it actually means that your checkout is getting better. When it drops, it means that there is an additional friction. It just reads more naturally in the same direction as any other growth metric, like traffic, conversion rate, or orders and sales. While bounce rate, on the other hand, has this weird thing that when performance actually gets worse, your number goes up. And for commercially driven managers or directors, well, that's quite the opposite of any normal KPI. You could potentially risk that this number gets misinterpreted, especially if your audience is very commercially driven. The second big trait of these two KPIs is that they are able to surface and emerge some year-over-year issues that volumes completely hide. Let's look at the following table, for example. Begin checkout grew 16% year over year. Ad shipping grew 2.5%. Did you see that gap? That is telling you something. The ad shipping completion rate dropped by 10 percentage points from 82 to 73. Flip it to abandon rate and suddenly it's a plus 10% increase. Same issue, different story. And here's why it matters. Completion rate makes you think in terms of opportunity. Where are conversions happening? How do we scale that? Abandon rate, on the other hand, makes you think in terms of diagnostic. Why did we lose people? At which step did they bounce? Both are legit, both are correct metrics, but they are pointing into opposite directions. Are you talking to an executive or a growth team? Well, I would suggest to use completion rate because it's a growth-oriented metric. Do you need to enter a conversion rate optimization meeting focused on UX? I would recommend to use bounce rate because it feels more natural to developers and it's generally more diagnostic when it comes to analyzing your digital product. The real mistake would be mixing each other and ending up with dashboards that maybe contradict themselves and nobody knows why. Pick one based on who your stakeholders are and go with it. One last thing, completion rate and bounce rate work perfectly whenever the funnel is locked, closed, and the steps are forced. Users should not be able to physically skip a step, exactly like in the checkout funnel. In the upper funnel, on the other hand, where users are much more free to navigate from one step to another, completion rate loses its power and there is a higher risk of misinterpretations. So don't overuse it and make sure to always look at a broader context like your marketing mix and your channel performance. Okay, so let's say that you have spotted a specific spike or drop at a specific step of your checkout funnel. But your overall completion rate at the last level of the checkout funnel, the purchase, is actually increasing. Your volume of purchases is also up, so you believe that your checkout funnel is actually healthy. And so, nevertheless, you realize that in a previous step of the funnel, the completion rate was dropping. Well, you're quite happy. But let me ask you a question. How much did that friction actually cost you? How much higher would be the very last step of the checkout funnel, the purchase step, if you didn't have a friction in the first or the second step of the checkout funnel? Especially if that friction causes a 10 percentage point drop in your completion rate, like in the table that we're seeing now. When frictions like these happen to your e-commerce, you might want to estimate how much impact this friction cost you. And so if a dashboard with a checkout funnel with the completion rate or bounce rate can tell you in which step that friction occurred, now comes the important part. When did that happen? And that's when a chart with the daily performance of these KPIs like completion rate or bounce rate comes in quite handy. And tables like this one are your secret weapon, especially in e-commerce, where every release, every integration or new project might leave a trace behind. So pull the daily, weekly, or monthly completion rate or bounce rate and compare it with last year results to see where you're actually and when you're actually losing users. And then you should be able to easily link that drop with a specific project launched or an integration or a new website release. And if the drop or the increase is spread evenly from that date forward, well, you're probably looking at something structural. A UX change, a new checkout flow, or a career integration that probably went sideways. If, on the other hand, it clusters around one specific date, you found your culprit. And that's a single event that your team fixed pretty quickly. The important thing that you remember is that with this chart, you can link specific actions with the consequences of those actions. So basically, you will be able to link a website release with a broken step of the checkout and how many users actually dropped because of that step broken. And suddenly you will be having a conversation with your stakeholders based on actual data. And you can use these insights to take relevant actions and optimize your conversion. Okay, let me give you 3 takeaways before we wrap up this video. First, the checkout funnel is locked. It's closed. You can and should use either bounce rate or completion rate to track it. The added value of these KPIs is that they represent the relationship between 2 adjacent steps, like payment and shipping. Both bounce rate and completion rate work just fine. It all depends on the stakeholder that you're talking to. Completion rate usually works better with the managers, executives, and stakeholders who are commercially driven because it just speaks their language. Growth and opportunity. Bounce rate lands better with technical people like developers, analysts, operation specialists. People who think in terms of what's broken and how to stop people from bouncing. 2. Don't confuse volume with performances. A 16% increase of sessions who begin checkout is a very positive number if it's paired with a positive number of completion rate. But as we saw in the example before, a huge chunk of users never made it to the purchase step because of shipping friction. If completion just stayed flat, well, your purchase volume would be way higher. Because long story short, top funnel volume is potential. Completion rate is what you actually capture of that potential. 3. Always pair your completion rate or bounce rate chart with a daily trend analysis. The dashboard representing the overall checkout funnel tells you if and where there is a problem. The daily performance chart tells you when that probably actually started, and that's where your real insight lays. Without the timeline, you're only halfway there. So thanks for watching this video. If you like this content about how data analytics can inform strategic decisions about e-commerce and digital products, well, make sure to drop a comment, hit the like button, and follow for more. Bye.